In Affinity Photo version 2, you can warp images as well as shapes and much more using the mesh warp feature. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the mesh warp feature. So let's just remove the mesh warp. So let's just delete that. And here is an image. This one is an Adobe stock image. And what I can now do is apply a mesh warp to it just to distort it from obviously the image you see here. First option, go to Filters and then down to Distort and down to Mesh Warp. The object needs to be selected. As long as it's selected, you can then go to Mesh Warp and you will see this bounding box around the edge. Now you'll notice up here, the assistant rasterized the layer previously had selected because it was not a raster layer. Now, this may be an issue for you. So if you haven't got this assistant set up, well, perhaps it won't work. So let's just cancel this point and just go back again. And you'll notice over here, if you've got the layer here, it doesn't say that it's a pixel layer. So what you can do, if you've got this, you can always go over here to Layer and then just down here and just use Rasterize. So Rasterize, straight away you've got a pixel layer. Now, if you go over here, again, make certain the layer is selected. So layer selected, you've got the move tool there so you can see selected there. Just go to Filters and again, just down here to Distort and Mesh Warp. Now you'll notice the message doesn't pop up. But that just may be one issue if you're doing it and it doesn't seem to work. So now you can see the bounding box for the warp again. And this, in this case, I'm using destination. There's another option here, but destination. And I can then just go up here and I can just drag this down. Just drag it down like that, so I can distort it that way. I can also go down there. And as you go down, you notice as you hover over the bottom part where the line is, the cursor changes. Gives a little wave there. Well, you can just click and you can drag like that. Now, obviously you can do a lot more as well. You can do the other side and you can do any point. So if you want to, you don't have to do the center bit, which of course I just did, but I can just drag from here. So you can see different results, different places. So let's just undo that. I'll just go back to that. You can always undo and just go to the top. So you can just drag it and create, subtle different warps. So you can just create a nice little warp design like that. So you don't have to just drag it out from the center or drag it out from the top. All kinds of different warps can be created just by going, look, a different position, say there, and just drag that down. And also the direction you go. So you can just change and stretch it up like that. And of course, you can also go over this edge as well. You can see obviously the edge there, but you can just drag it over there. So it looks like it's really just warping off, going off the screen, etc. But you can do all kinds of different warps just by that. But also what you can do is you can add additional points to it, or nodes, I guess, in Affinity Photo. So let's again undo. Let's just push it back to this default position. And I'm going to go for the center. So in the center, I can just double click. And now let's just add this node. And what I can now do is I can warp it from the center. So I can just drag this out so you can create a different sort of warping effect from the center. Or maybe select a particular book or select a particular part of an image that you want to manipulate in different ways. So you don't have to do it just around the edge. And also what you can do, you can go double click again somewhere else and create this. Also, you can select all of those, just hover and drag over. So just drag over like that. And you'll see now these ones are selected. You can see the black there, they've been selected. And you can just go to one of them. But what's happening, the whole lot are being used in this warp. And you can create some really interesting, weird warps just by selecting maybe multiple of these nodes. Also, you can go here and you can use these control points. So you can create some very interesting, weird sort of distortions just by manipulating this. And just down there, you can see create like that. And of course, if you want to create things with like text effects, etc., this is a great way of distorting particular letters, say. And again, you can just go to any other one. Now you can go to any of these don't have to be selected. You can see these ones are selected. You can just drag this down, drag this that way, and so on. It can overlap the image, so you can create, again, some very oddball and interesting effects. At any point, you can always undo and just go back. Now, you can also click here, reset. Much easier than doing undo, but of course, you might just change one or two things and you want to not remove everything. So that's not so useful, but reset and it puts it back to that. But it's not really resetting it totally, because you'll notice you've still got these nodes there, but it's just put it back to these sort of position like this. So if I just again double click and add some more, you can see I can add, I don't know if there's a limit, maybe there's a limit, I've never encountered a particular limit, but you can see you can create a lot. And then you can distort, say that. But you also notice if you add more and more of these nodes, when you actually go and manipulate this point, it becomes a very localized warp. Whereas when you only had the edge itself, you could warp in, it would be quite a dramatic warping. So you can see you can drag this out and drag here, so you can create some very odd effects, say with this person's hair. And you could double click there and just add around the hair and just distort particular parts. Something like that to create some very odd, weird hairstyles very quickly. Again, you can do exactly the same as before. You can hover over all those and select those. And then you can see now as you move it, as long as you don't select the actual control point, you actually select this. And then you can see what happens. It creates this really weird stretch, a sort of like central point that's obviously solid there. But this part of the image and this part of the image, etc., are all stretched and distorted. And again, at any point, if you don't like it, you can always reset again. Also, what you can do is you can go up here and you can convert. So if you go here, click this one and just drag up and down. What you can also do is you can go here and go for smooth, go for sharp, and so on. You can create different effects by changing those. Now, I can just drag that out. And again, if I click there, it's very subtle, obviously, when you've got lots and lots of these points. But again, fortunately, reset doesn't actually reset all those. So if you've got all these ones, probably at the end of the day, best option is just cancel and then just simply, again, make sure it's selected and then again go to filters and then down to distort and mesh warp and apply that and manipulate that like that. Now, once you've done this, key thing is click apply. Obviously, doing all this doesn't make any difference if you don't click apply. So click apply, and then you've got your distorted design, your distorted pixel layer. However, again, go back over here, move tool, and you go to layer. You'll notice there's no fade for this. It's distorted the layer. It just doesn't have any information to do a fade, which I think is a pity. Also, you've got the repeat mesh warp, but again, layer, no fade there. So you can obviously keep applying the mesh warp you've generated, but no fade or obviously blending. Now, if you want to do a blend with this, there is, of course, a workaround. There always is a workaround. So let's just undo, put it back to here, and you've got this. And let's just, again, with this, just duplicate the layer. That's about the easiest way to do it. Just go to layer and then just duplicate. So with them duplicated, now select the top layer, or of course the bottom layer. It's perfectly reasonable as well. But then with that one selected, you can then go to filters and then down to distort and mesh warp and just click there and drag. And you can see now why, of course, the fade doesn't work. You've got this image here, the image here, the layer is totally different. So obviously it just doesn't know what to do with it. It is a pity it just doesn't work for this part. Just ignore this part, but that doesn't seem to be the way it works. So click apply. Now, of course, what you can do, you can go over here, layers, you've got the blend, and you can just say darken there, and you can see you can create some interesting combinations by just going for, say, difference, etc., to create that sort of effect. So let's just remove that again and back to this single layer. You can also use the mesh warp with an opened image. So I've got this file here, I've just opened it. I've got the layer selected, and you see there background. Go to filters and distort and mesh warp. And you can just drag down there, and now you can see the transparency. You see behind that background layer. And you can go up, down here again, exactly the same as before, and again over the other side and drag in like that. There's nothing needed to be changed. You don't have to rasterize it or anything like that. You've just got the standard pixel layer to work with. Now also what you can do with this, you can also double click along the line, and you can see then it will create these lines, and it follows the warp, so it makes a bit of a blend. It changes as you go across. See there, go over the other side, all the way over to the other side, and so on. You can see then it just follows that. So it just distorts slightly in that center, and then just finally matches that parallel curve. Well, you can also do the other side as well. So double click there, and you can see exactly the same thing. So you can create some interesting designs that way as well. And again, manipulate it further by just clicking there and manipulating the nodes there. Now, unfortunately, there's no feature to save this set of nodes. I would love that feature to be added, a preset, but sadly, there's not a way here anyway of doing that. And if you don't want that change, simply cancel, or of course, just click apply. Now you'll notice there's another option as well. And this option is really useful for creating some very unusual designs. So let's just quickly do that one. So I'm just going to go here. And again, I've got this layer selected. Now it's locked here, doesn't matter, but I'm just going to click there just to unlock it. I prefer an unlocked layer. But again, go to filters, and then just down here to distort and mesh warp. Again, with the layer selected, I can then modify this and move this around, but it's using destination. What I want is source. So source. Now with source, it works slightly different. You can just go here and you can do exactly the same, but you'll see what's happening. What you've got here, the image, is not changing. And that will be the case for anything you select when you're using it with source. And you can just go over here and you can change this. Doesn't look like it's much use. And I'm certain there's lots of great uses for it, but this is something I use anyway. I'm just going to show you, I'm just going to drag this over, and I can drag this over, and I can also add some points. So now, if you try and click there, it won't add it, because you'll notice the actual warp is this part. This isn't the warp. So just clicking that's just a waste of time. Which is a pity, really. In many ways, it would be nice if you could see an overlay that showed you where the mesh actually wasn't there or it is there. So it would be nice, but unfortunately that isn't available. But here's the actual warp. So click there, and you can see then you get this really weird tangle. As soon as you bend things over and distort things and then add these points or nodes, then you've got very odd design. But also not only that, again, you can add some more, and you can see they get really tangled, really knotted and everything else like that. Another feature would be nice, of course, randomization. Well, there isn't. The only randomization is just randomly clicking at particular positions. But it would be nice if there was a random grid feature. Okay, that's using source. And now I can apply. And that's the result, which is pretty weird. And you probably would not be able to create something very abstract, unusual. And this can be used, say, like with a gradient or text, etc. You wouldn't be able to create this using the destination feature, not particularly easily, but I find that the source feature is a great way of creating some truly abstract designs by simply not particularly knowing what the result will be. So it's a random sort of feature of Affinity Photo. But also you can go up here and repeat mesh warp and apply it again. And sometimes this near enough creates like a wood texture. You can see a wood-like effect here. Obviously got ripples there in the wood. Of course, the actual design is distorted, but you can always go here with the move tool and just resize it, etc., and distort it. But you've got a very, very wood-like design there very quickly. Now, this feature, I think, super useful. You probably wouldn't use it all the time, but certainly for some creating abstract designs, I think it's super useful. One thing you should notice with the mesh warp, is it doesn't work across multiple layers. Many filters in Affinity Photo work across multiple layers, but unfortunately this tool doesn't. The way around it, simply group all of the layers. As soon as they're grouped, you've got a group there. Make certain you then go to, with the group selected, go to filters and then down to distort and then mesh warp. And you can see the mesh warp, the bounding box, is then applied around the entire design. Again, this assistant will pop up. Now, if you haven't got the assistant actually set up, this will not appear and the filter will not work properly. And what you can do is you can modify this and all of the layers are distorted, but all the layers have become a single pixel layer now. If I cancel this, you'll notice I've still got a pixel layer. It's done the conversion beforehand, and now if you want to go all the way back, just do an undo and then you're back to the group again. And then of course you can select individual ones and then modify them separately using the mesh warp tool. Now the mesh warp also works with other designs as well. It doesn't just work with layers like this, it can be used with a shape. Let's just go over here and I'm going to select a star. Let's go with the star tool and create a star like that. Now with the star, I can go over here and again filters and down to distort and mesh warp. But as soon as I do that, it will be turned into a pixel layer. It will not keep it as a vector design. So let's just change the color so you can actually see that. Just click there and let's just go for a color you can see. And now filters, again distort and mesh warp. There, again, the assistant will pop up. Now, if you haven't got the assistant set up to do this, this will not work. It will not do that rasterization for you. So let's just again cancel. What you need to do is with the star is go to layer and then down to rasterize beforehand. And then you can go there with a pixel layer. You can go to filters and again just down to distort and mesh warp. So that's the workaround for that if it doesn't work for you. And you can then, of course, distort design, do exactly the same as you can do with an image, just a normal image. You can add additional nodes. You can distort particular areas, so that will distort then. Now you'll notice, because you've got this node and this node here, that if you just drag this up and distort this, nothing else is moving. So it's a great way of confining just the warping just to that particular area. But again, you can just now double click there, add another point, and you can just drag this and create a central point there. And again, mesh warp like that. And again, this area totally unmoved, only this part is actually warped and distorted. Now you can see what happens when you warp it too far. You get this very rough, coarse effect appearing. So you have to be careful, obviously, how many times you do this. But as all things Affinity Photo, there is a solution, a great workaround. And the great workaround is that you can use live layers as a mesh warp as well. So let's just go over here and remove this and bring an image in. If you use live filter layers, you don't have to rasterize or do anything special with this image. All you need to do is simply go over here to layer and then just down here to new live filter layer and then distort and mesh warp. And with that, you can see now you've got your bounding box around your image without any conversion. It's still exactly the same as before, a placed object. And if you go over here to layers panel, and you can expand this out and you can see your mesh warp. Now at this point, you can see here, you've got all the various options, destination, etc. So I'm using destination and I'm just going to distort this design. So I'm just going to drag this down and just drag that there and drag that there and so on. So you can see I can create a distortion like that. And now click done. And you can see now I've got the mesh warp here. And at any point, if I decide I don't want that effect, I can change it. So it's not fixed. The underlying image also can be removed, changed, all those kind of things, and distorted, modified in other ways as well. But the mesh warp is still live and can still modify whatever is been selected here. So just go here, double click and, or click, and bring up the mesh warp. Again, you've got destination and you've got your bounding box here. And you can then say, oh, you know what? Let's add an additional couple of nodes here. So I'm just going to double click again, double click there, and you've got that. And you can distort it maybe slightly different way. You want a slightly bigger cookie there in that part. Obviously, you squeeze this cookie a bit, but you can also move it over here, modify it, and so on. And exactly the same as before, just click done, and you've still got this design here, and you've still got your image here. Now, if you don't want the warp, you just want it back to the original image, just go here. On the side here, you can just click this to make it not visible. So you've got your design. You can now just select it, move it around. You can also go to your standard filters, go filters, maybe blur, Gaussian blur. So just apply a blurring effect like that and then click apply. Now, I might want to bring back the warp, but you'll notice it's gone because, of course, it was part of it, which is not ideal. So workaround, just go back again, just undo, make certain that the mesh warp there is just above. I just do that, just go there. So the mesh warp is above that, and then select this, then apply the effect. So filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and you've got the Gaussian blur there, click apply, and you can still see you've got your warp design. And then if you want, you can always just go to the mesh warp and again drag it down, and you see all highlighted there. And now again that pixel layer has that mesh warp added to it. And of course, any image can have the same mesh warp. So if I bring another image in, or maybe let's just go over here instead of an image, let's just move that out of the way slightly. I can go with the star again. So let's just go with the star. So just create the star as before. And of course, I might stretch this out a bit like that. This star can also have the same mesh warp. Simply just go down here. You've got the mesh warp here. Right click. And then you can go say duplicate. So duplicate, and you've got a mesh warp again. Obviously, you've distorted it even more now. You can apply multiple mesh warps. So you can have 3, 4, 5, 10 of these mesh warps applied to that object. But what you can also do is you can take one of them and simply just select that and just drag that up. And again, you can see highlight all of that star. That whole bar becomes a blue bar there, and release. And now the star has the same mesh warp as well. So obviously, let's just remove this one, this pixel image. You can see the result is not the greatest of warps. So you might, obviously at this point, bring this up again and distort it and warp it in different ways. And you can just change this, and it probably works better with a particular image. But it's a way, of course, copying a mesh warp around, as there are no presets. But perhaps that is the reason they haven't added a presets, because the results probably are more sort of unusual and hard to work with. So you can always, exactly the same, it's a layer here, and you can just delete it if you don't want it applied to star. And then, of course, you can do exactly the same as before. You can go to layer and just down then to new light filter layer, and then distort and mesh warp. And now you can, of course, modify this properly on top of the actual star design there. And again, the star is still live. So if you want to, at any point, you can always just go back to it. So let's just click done. I've got the distortion applied. Go to the star and make sure you select the star here. And now you can just change it. So you can go up here, number of points, and you can see as you change it, the warp is still there, but the star itself is being modified, and you can tweak it, obviously, inner radius and outer circle, etc., to create all kinds of different designs, all still using this mesh warp. It's still a vector design, which you can also, if you want the star, you can convert to curves. At the moment, it's a star, so you can do all these various settings, but you can convert to curve and then modify the individual nodes. So click here, convert to curves, and now you can see you get this sort of design with obviously the nodes here, and then you can go here and just drag, and this will change, but it also still will use that mesh warp applied. You haven't lost the mesh warp, so if you expand this out, it's still there, even though you convert it to curves. You can also use the mesh warp with text. In this case, I'm going to go with filters and then distort and mesh warp, you'll notice the text is selected. You can see there in the layers panel, the text is still text. So if I go with mesh warp, you'll notice the system pops up. Again, if you haven't got this set up, you'll need to rasterize before you try and warp that text. And now you can see you've got the bounding box, exactly the same as before, and then you can just distort it, move it this way or that way, and distort text, countless things, which of course again would be great if there were some presets, but unfortunately there isn't any presets. So click apply, and there you've got your distorted text. If you want to keep it live, the text live, again, use live warp. So let's just go over here and undo this again and put it back to text. So with text, exactly the same text. What you can now do is you can go to layer, and you can go to live filter layer, new live filter layer I should say, distort and mesh warp. As long as it's selected, then mesh warp like that. Again, you get your bounding box. You've got no other options. You've got no blending modes, etc. Most of the filters, live filter layers, have additional things like blending modes, but again, this is not available. And you can then just distort this. Now it's still a vector design, so you can just drag this up and you move this down here, squeeze this and distort it. It's still live. As soon as you've done this, done, you can always go back and change it. So again, just click there, mesh warp, click, and again, you'll see this. And then you can change it again. Just hover over there and just drag, move it around, double click, additional points, and then just drag there to squeeze the text there, and then click done. Now, you can still modify the text. So you can go up here and just select this text and just go down here again to the artistic text tool. With that selected, you can then select parts of the text, and let's just go for, say, ext instead. So you can just edit it, maybe have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see, unfortunately, there's one trouble with this, is that now extends beyond the edge of that warp. So again, what you can do is you can go to the mesh warp, click there, and you can see now you've got 1, 2, 3. Unfortunately, the rest of the text is lost. So you might like to just simply remove it. So select it and then just delete it, and then go back and just add a new mesh warp. I find that perhaps easier way of doing it. So again, with this text, you can simply go to layer and then down to new live filter layer, distort and mesh warp, and just start. Then you can see the whole bounding box of that warp is stretched all the way over. It is a pity it doesn't reset it. Now, it's possible that you could probably use one of these options to do that. I can't say that I've worked that out. Now, click done. Once you've done an actual distortion, let's just distort that like that and click done. You can also create some very interesting effects using selections. This effect was created using the selection and the mesh warp. So let's just undo that. So just go back, and I'm going to just delete the layer. It's much easier just to delete it, and it's back to as before. Well, just create a very basic selection. And this is what I'm going to do first. I'm just going to create a rectangular marquee and just go like that. So what you can then do is you can go to filters, and you can go down to distort and mesh warp. So mesh warp, and now you can see you've got your bounding box. The layer selected, that's a key thing. And then just drag. Now, if you drag down too far, you end up this. You can see through layer. So you might have a layer below this, but you can see the transparency there. Maybe you could add some styles or layer effects as well. And you can distort it in all kinds of ways. And then click apply. Now, there's still no blending modes. There's still no fade feature for this. So what you get is what you get. And select and deselect. So you can see you can create some interesting designs, which you could use maybe with text images, all kinds of different designs. But the selection box you can see here, you can change it. You can apply, of course, more than just a basic rectangle. So let's just undo. I can go over here, and with this rectangular, I could use this, hold down the shift, holding down the shift, equivalent of doing this, just going up here using the add option. So hold the shift, you can see now the cursor changes, and now you can add to this selection. And you can make thin lines. Let's just create very thin lines like this. like that. And you can, of course, add them all any place like that. Once you've done that, you can now again use the mesh warp. So again, go over here to filters, distort, and mesh warp. Mesh warp, you can now go up here with destination, source, etc. But you can also modify this bounding box. Just drag down. Now, if you drag it down, you can see the result of that. Again, you've got some transparency kicking in there, but maybe you want it like this. So you can just make sort of lovely sort of bars across there. Interesting visual effect. And once you've done that, click apply. Now, of course, you could repeat it. So layer, filter, I should say, repeat mesh warp, probably better. And you can see you can create an interesting combination effect. So filter, repeat mesh warp, and you can see it applies it again and again and again. However, let's just undo that. I don't want that, because what you can also do is, instead of using the filter effect, which is a destructive effect, what you can do is, with this selection, or of course a basic selection as well, doesn't need to be made up of a complex design like this. What you can do is you can go to layer, and then just down here to new live filter layer, distort, and mesh warp. Exact same situation. You get this effect, this bounding box for the mesh warp, which you can then again modify this. And you can see as you drag this over, you get different changes of angles there, like that. And again, once you're happy with it, and you of course can create all kinds of different warps here. You can again double click, add some additional nodes, etc. You can then click done. Now, the thing about this, it's still live, so you can always go back and modify it at any point. So just go over here and you can see you've got the selection. You don't need the selection, because all it is the mask. So go to select and deselect. You can still edit this. So you can see the selection there in the mask, which you can modify. But also you can click here and you can bring up the destination again, this bounding box. So you might say, you know what, that effect, I don't want that. I wanted it slightly over the other way. So just something like that. So you just drag it, move it, modify it in countless ways. It's editable, it's still live, which you can then modify. And it's associated with that layer. So you could add multiple, of course, effects and selections to create really weird and wonderful designs. So let's click done again. Now, as mentioned, the mesh warp, you can duplicate it. So right click and duplicate. And then you can see you get this effect. Right click and duplicate. You get another effect. You get sort of a fragmented effect as it sort of scans across, it breaks it apart. And you can go and modify any of these individually as well. So again, just click there. Again, you've got destination, you've got this bounding box, and then just tweak this so you can change that effect. So you can create some variations again. You double click to create little nodes there and modify that. And you can see then you get that type of distortion. And again, click done. And you can change all kinds of things. And also, if you wish, maybe go with another selection. So a selection there. Maybe again, hold down the shift so you can get selection there, and exactly the same as before, you can go layer and new live filter layer, and then down to distort and mesh warp. And now you see you get another mesh warp. Now it's above all of the existing ones, and you can then just distort that and just move that there, change that, squeeze that in if you want, and then click done. However, select, deselect, say you want this to be part of just the background there, the image you've got here. You can simply just go over here and just drag down there. Makes sense, it's all highlighted there. As you drag it down, it becomes highlighted and release, and then you got it there. And you can move these around. So you might say I want that one at the top, and so on. So you can just move them around, reposition to get different warpings as well. Subtle changes, but it does result in different, and you can duplicate it, etc. And at any point, if you decide, you know what, I don't want that one, I can always just click here and make it not visible. Simply change the visibility by clicking here. Hope you found this of interest. Any questions, any thoughts about the mesh warp? Please let me know in the comments below. Always great to hear from you. Are there other things you think I should have explored? I'm certain there are, like pattern layers, which I didn't really cover at all. That also can be used with the mesh warp as well. A like or dislike, always appreciated. Please subscribe to the channel, always add new videos about Affinity Photo all the time.